Welcome to the Target Report interview number 5. With me today again is Mark Hahn, who writes the Target Report. Mark, we're just so pleased to have you with us again today. You've made a very compelling case in this latest Target Report that acquirers that have been in the market growing by acquisition continue to complete deals, staying strategically, and I think that's the key word here, on the path that they've chosen. Can you give us a quick illustration of that?
What we noticed in July, the transactions that were announced in July, is that while the M&A activity is not as robust as it was before the breakout of the virus, it's steady. There's a steady drumbeat of acquisitions. And the buyers that are acting are following a strategic path, consistently the path that they were on before the virus. And while some of the acquisitions are opportunistic, meaning they're taking advantage of the current situation, the buyers are not veering off of the path that they were on. So I think that's the takeaway from the recent transactions, is that buyers are executing, as you say, Rod, strategically in the direction with a clear vision that they had before this. So they're marching forward, so to speak.
Can you give us some examples of some specific deals?
Yeah, I think one that really stood out was CJK Group's acquisition of a 1 million square foot factory in Kentucky, and that was acquired from Quad. And interesting enough, this transaction really illustrates two strategic directions. Quad exiting the book business in their announced Quad 3.0 strategy, and CJK strategy to build out a national book manufacturing platform. That's, I think, their primary product that they produce. So you've got these two strategies working that came together in this transaction. And Quad has announced that they're going to sell their other two book manufacturing plants. And as they execute their strategy, which is building more marketing services around their print platform, they've apparently decided that the book manufacturing business doesn't have enough of those other ancillary or additional services to continue as part of their portfolio. So they're jettisoning those. So, and as a part of that same dynamic, we have another large book manufacturing company, LSC Communications, which in a similar fashion to Quad was building out other services, digital marketing services, around their core print platform, but it wasn't enough soon enough, or whatever went wrong. So at some point they announced that they were going to be acquired by Quad. The U.S. Department of Justice nixed that. They squashed that transaction. Yes, a lot of people in the printing industry are still scratching their head over that decision, given all the other acquisitions and mergers that go on. But nonetheless, it was turned down. And LSC then was left with almost no choice but to enter bankruptcy. And what's key about this is now there's going to be a sale of LSC's assets this fall, and we'll see what happens with their book manufacturing. So again, different strategies coming together, but still consistently executed on the path that they were on.
Then you highlighted the Matera Group. I mean, they're the last national roll-up happening. Can you give us a quick overview of that?
Yeah, and I would say, Rod, you're correct. Arguably, Matera is the sole existing, I don't want to say remaining, because they're newer than the other ones that disappeared, consolidator, national consolidator in the commercial printing industry. And Matera acquired Ambassador, a large format offset and wide format printing device company. And that's a tuck-in. They've announced that they're closing down that factory. So it's probably, this one probably is opportunistic in the sense of the current turn down. But it's right down the middle of what Matera has been doing, acquiring commercial printing facilities. And I think, I suspect that some of that work is going to end up in their Fuse facility in the Chicagoland area that they acquired just last fall. And Fuse itself was a mini roll-up of 3 other printing companies. And it's not the first one that Matera has actually bought other roll-ups into this larger roll-up that they're executing on. So that's again, the point being this month is they're not off course. They're right on course with what they've been doing before the virus, and that's still what they're executing on.
Well, and they've been at this a while. I mean, it wasn't the first deal around 2007, I think.
I think it was. The company grew out of Rock Communications. John Trone, who's the CEO, when he took over the reins of the family company, he first acquisition was Color FX, which I believe was also in Iowa, where Materia is based. And since then, he's been executing one transaction after the other, and some of them have been quite large, but all within this commercial print space and really nationally.
I mean, as a former printer myself, I love your insightful comments of HH Global. Could you just kind of walk through that with us a little bit?
Yeah, it's interesting. HH Global acquired Inner Workings, the print management company or marketing execution company. I've actually received some emails already from people thanking me in the Target Report online and the executive summary email that goes out for a forthright, opinionated couple paragraphs about Inner Workings. And why do I say that? Inner Workings is a print intermediary, effectively a large, sophisticated print broker. Not most commercial printing company owners are not a fan of Inner Workings and these companies that come in and intermediate or take over the print buying function for large customers. And as you can imagine, a lot of printing companies, the call they don't want to get is that their largest customer has now hired Inner Workings or HH Global or Tag Williams Lee to take over the print buying. And I can remember when I owned a printing company in the 90s, we got a call from a customer, oh, we have this company, Williams Lee or whoever it was at the time, and they're now going to buy our printing. And so you get a call from them and they want you to lower your price 15%. And it's an awful situation for a lot of printing companies.
No tears shed there on that one.
No tears shed. And probably for the demise of Inner Workings, and kind of an interesting little twist on this whole process that typical print brokers don't do, but that these intermediaries do, is they hire or rebadge the buyers. So your customer who used to work for Citibank or whomever now works for Inner Workings. So that loyalty, that long-term loyalty, evaporates in that situation. So as you said, Rod, I don't think there's going to be a lot of tears shed for the demise of Inner Workings.
For sure not on that.
See.
I really enjoyed the McClatchy newspaper story, you know, the Chatham Asset Management buying them. Can you just kind of overview that one for us real quick?
Yes, McClatchy Newspapers, which dates well over 100 years, started with the Sacramento Bee, a newspaper in Sacramento, California. They acquired a significant number of newspapers across the country, including an ill-timed acquisition of the Knight Ridder newspaper chain for, I think, $4.5 billion or some large number, right in the height of the high valuation of newspapers. And of course, it's been downhill ever since. So between that debt and the pension obligations, McClatchy had to file bankruptcy. I think it was in February of this year. So they've now been acquired in a 363 sale in bankruptcy by Chatham Asset Management. So why is this interesting? Well, on this month's theme, Chatham Asset Management is no stranger to newspapers. They're executing on their strategy, which is acquiring distressed newspaper chains or newspaper chains. They own a chain in Canada, and they also own American Media, which rather infamously owns the National Enquirer. What else is important about that transaction is it represents the transition of many of the American newspapers from civically minded, family owned companies, the McClatchys were a good example, to investment firms that are looking for ways to monetize these assets. And not necessarily a good thing for American newspapers, but it's part of the degradation of the newspaper business that's occurring. So interesting on two fronts for that transaction.
Thank you. This month, you also included a COVID-19 update, and I thought it was really interesting that you're not finding, at least yet to date, too many bankruptcies happening, but you did note the second bankruptcies of both Ebony and the Jet brands. Can you do a quick overview of those, please?
Yeah, and Rod, you're correct. I don't think we found any Chapter 11s in the printing and packaging industry in July. Non-bankruptcy plant closures are still occurring, but the one bankruptcy we did find was the Ebony and Jet brands. Those are the African-American publishing media company, but they declared bankruptcy several years ago, and the assets were sold to a private equity company in Texas, and they've now declared bankruptcy again. Interestingly enough, these two magazines ceased publication, so there's not been print editions of either Jet or Ebony for a few years, and as recently as this May, the websites are now offline. So pretty much out of publication, and we'll see what happens with those brands. And an interesting aspect of that is probably the most valuable asset of Ebony and Jet were the photo archives, which go back to the 40s. And the one that I found, and those photo archives were not acquired by the Texas private equity company. They were sold separately in the original bankruptcy to a group of philanthropists that got together and bought the photo archives, and then they're maintaining those separately. And probably the most historic one that everybody might know about was the photo of Emmett Till in 1956, I think, was the young boy who was killed in Mississippi, and the photo of his mother over his open casket in Chicago. So in a different time and place, print drove the social consciousness of the country. That photo was a spark of really the original or the 50s civil rights movement, in the same way that video and iPhones and social media have sparked the current protests with the George Floyd video. And so it's somewhat indicative of the transition from print to other media. So just found that interesting in this historical evolution through the bankruptcy process.
I really enjoyed for what for me was a very poignant review of the Hennigan Company in Cincinnati. I mean, as a former printer, I remember Hennigan. You as a former printer, you remember Hennigan. I mean, they were the creme de la creme of printing. So can you just kind of give us a quick overview of what's happened there?
Yeah, Rod, that was very interesting. And as with you on the West Coast, on the East Coast, there were a lot of nice printers. I worked for one in the 80s, and we were high-end printers. I had customers like IBM. I sold printing before I started my own company, and Merck and high-end New York designers. But even then, as hard as we worked, when they wanted a job where they said they needed the best of the best, they would say, well, Mark, I'm sorry, this job's going to go to Hennigan in Cincinnati. So that name still has that ring to me of being a super high quality company. At one point, it was sold to Consolidated Graphics, CGX, which was then rolled up into R.R. Donnelley. So it was R.R. Donnelley that announced the decision to close the Hennigan facility in Cincinnati. So the end of a legacy company, as we've seen many in this transition in the commercial printing industry.
Indeed. It was a terrific Target report this month. And for those of you who are watching this interview, if you haven't read it, I greatly encourage you to go online and read the Target reports. Mark, you do a terrific job each month on these. And it's a joy and an honor to chat with you about them. And everyone, thank you so much for watching. We hope to see you again next month.